You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you very much, as always, for joining us. And today we continue our journey. We continue our walk down the road of what is a CPO, which is I call it a spin-off series, but really it's just part of the main podcast. And to do that, I need the orchestrator of that to be my co-host, Debbie. How would you describe it? Is it a spin-off series? Is it a journey? What is it?
Mini-series, but it's taking over the world,
A mini-series. Bit Frasier to Cheers. Or
exactly.
That
we are the
ill-fated,
Frasier to your Cheers.
Yeah, that ill-fated Friends that then had the Joey episode or something that I think lasted a season and they realised wasn't very
Frasier.
good. Yeah. Unlike those, we get to choose how many episodes there are, and we don't get cancelled by a major network broadcaster. So we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep going today. And we are introducing our latest CPO, who's going to talk to us about his organisation, and we're going to get into a few bits around human-centred leadership, integration across multiple organisations, and also it's an organisation, I'm going to let him explain because he'll do it far better than me, with that PE focus and some of the challenges and opportunities that have arisen from it. But I'll introduce him first. It is Jonny Friedman, who is Senior Vice President of People and Talent at an organisation called Acumetis. Jonny, how you doing? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you. A super introduction from you both.
Yeah, you liked the Fraser reference more, didn't you? Or was it the Joey reference that really got you?
I think probably Joey. Perhaps I shouldn't admit it, but I can relate to him in some ways.
Maybe that's for another podcast. Let's explore that later. Let's start.
Yeah, I think that's another spin-off.
Yeah, it certainly is. Let's start off with a little bit about yourself and your background, and then Acumetis as well, which at the time of recording is a relatively new company, right?
Yes, it's a very new company. Literally, Acumetis is our brand new name for the rebranding of our organisation, which is effectively a collection of 5 acquisitions across the globe, all focus on the commercialisation of drugs to market, making sure that our patients get the right drugs at the right time. So I joined a smaller business called Ficon back in January 2024, and that was a scale-up business and a family-owned business as well, roughly about 100 people, and they were looking to grow that business and looking for a way to join something bigger. That business then was acquired by a company called Hirschspiegel, and Hirschspiegel acquired not only Ficon but also 3 other organisations over the next period of 18 months, and hence we've now rebranded as one single company called Acumetis. It's not easy. We're struggling to follow it as colleagues. I'm sure the listeners may be struggling with that too. But ultimately, we're now 350 people worldwide across 9 different countries, lots of different challenges of bringing businesses together across both people, process and technology, different views on culture, perspectives. And also, this is a move from what were 5 very kind of family-oriented type organizations, moving to a US-owned company that is private equity-backed. And the difference and the priorities are now shifting significantly, and the employee experience is very different. And it's something that I'm very cognizant of.
Thank you. I want to dive deeper into some of those challenges in a minute, Jonny, but I think where we always start on the podcast is to ask the killer question of what is a CPO? So in your view, what is a CPO?
The CPO is effectively the conscience of the business from both an emotional and psychological perspective, and also to validate people's thinking through data and insight. It's trying to combine both kind of emotional intelligence and kind of data and business intelligence and check that those two are coming together. It is about working across the entire business, across multiple stakeholders, being a servant leader. Without people on the front line, I don't have a job. My team don't have a job. And most importantly, our people are there to serve our patients. That's why we're here. So to be able to deliver both our mission and vision for the business.
Thank you. And in terms of, so within that business, are there any nuances for you? If that was a generic description of a CPO, is there anything specific in your business that you think is high priority or the biggest must win for you as the CPO in Acumetis?
I don't know if it's necessarily totally specific to our organisation, but we have a lot of very clever people. We have a lot of health economists, scientists, kind of economic modelers who are both super academic and also are very client focused, and they do detail. So any change that you need to deliver, they're all over it. Additionally, the way that we grow and nurture our talent is by recruiting from the graduate market, those who have either done degrees, masters, PhDs. So probably over 35-40% of our workforce are now Gen Z, and they're educating me on how they perceive the world. And I'm really enjoying that. I didn't at first. I was very much, who are they to challenge us? But actually, they've every right to. And they've taught me about key parts of leadership. One of them being that just be honest, be as authentic and as transparent as you can be. Don't put the spin on things and just tell us as how it is. And I found that really refreshing.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, but it's helpful, very helpful.
This is interesting, and I kind of want to stay on this just for a little bit, because the first question I've just written down was, how has that actually changed your role? Because you've obviously been in the business. I know it's the brand is new, but the business you've been in a few years. How different is it from that kind of cultural perspective compared to when you first arrived, or even previous businesses as well? Because obviously you've got a background working for, I know you were at HR Go from an interim stuff as well, but in this specific business, how much has that changed? And is this a recent thing, or is this kind of been a longer period of time, that kind of Gen Z side? And perhaps also linked to that, second question is around how much is the need for the way in which you or your team communicate to these people? You touched on it there. The comms part of it must have changed quite significantly as well, right?
For sure, it has changed. This organisation particularly has a very strong Gen Z percentage, and it exposed me to some of the challenges in a much more intense way than I had imagined or than I've experienced before. It's very interesting. It makes me realise that when I first started out as a graduate and I performed my role and then I moved into HR, I did a lot of things without challenging, or I did stuff because I was told. And I thought that was a really good sign of showing that I was being conscientious. I thought it was a really good sign of showing my diligence, my commitment, my enthusiasm, and that I fit the company mold. And now we're in a different era, right? We're in an era that's bombarded with technology, with social media, with thoughts, with ideas, and everything else. And it's a survival for the fittest in terms of being a differentiator and an innovator. We need to allow the platforms for people to say what they're able to offer, what they're able to think. And one of the important things is that people feel able to challenge. And people feel that that can happen. There's still a respect for kind of everybody in their different roles, but it's a much healthier organisation to have that debate and to be known as a leader for listening. I think that's one of the key things I pride myself on, is that I might respectfully disagree with a point of view, but I will always listen. And I think that's something that's so important and that other people value.
Just related to that, so you're talking about your personal experience and things, how you've learned, but also you've got your whole sort of people manager or your line manager sort of level of people that might be in a similar sort of position. How do you think your business has adapted culturally to that? Obviously, you just talked about your personal lived experience, but I'm just thinking about that's one person, but have you noticed anything across the business from a cultural perspective of how lots of people are having to deal with this and engage with this perhaps slightly differently? And any kind of bits or thoughts that you could give back to anyone listening in who perhaps might be working in an organization that is not yet at that point? Maybe it's a more established business and you've got older workers, but ultimately, eventually, you're going to get Gen Z taking over the workforce at points, right?
Sure. We're only going to get a greater proportion of Gen Zs coming into the workforce, right? Look, some leaders and some managers struggle with it more than others, struggle with being challenged, but we're learning, we're trying to push through this mantra that everybody has a voice, everybody deserves to be listened to, and everybody rightfully has the opportunity to challenge. One of the things that this rebrand has enabled us to do, Chris and Debbie, is that we've taken our 4 key values and we've done workshops at every single level to talk about what are the behaviours that we want to see and we want to embrace against each of those values that are both positive and also those behaviours that we will not tolerate. And that is now becoming our staple for where we build everything else from. And by having that gives us a commonality and kind of a source of reference about what we are prepared and not prepared to tolerate. It's interesting. You also have situations in culture whereby there are some things that people unintentionally upset people because they might have offended people without even realizing, and learning about that is really important. Another thing that we are in the process of building, because we realise that this is a more and more important initiative, is building a reverse mentorship programme. We feel that's really important, that all of our SLT, we intend to have a mentor from the front line to work with us, and we can share learnings ourselves. And I think that's something that didn't used to happen 30, 40 years ago. It's definitely something that now is very prominent in a lot of progressive organisations and something that we want to continue with.
So one of the things that kind of draws me to is thinking about, as the CPO, how do you shape and reframe what leadership is about in your organisation, right? So you touched before we started recording the podcast on human-centred leadership. So talk to us a little bit about that and what's happening in that space for you.
Of course, I think that in our business right now, we're in the 5-year investment cycle, and we're in the final year of that 5-year investment cycle. So we're at the business end, and therefore the numbers are very important in terms of what we deliver, in terms of our revenue, in terms of our margins, in terms of our contribution and EBITDA. We have to balance that by driving as strong of a set of results as possible with having a happy workforce. Equally, what we've got to do is we've got to integrate 5 businesses into one across people, process and technology. So all the systems need to integrate, all our processes need to integrate, and all our people need to be harmonized onto similar contracts or the same contract both in each of their geographical regions. That is not an easy challenge, whilst continuing to win more work from the business development, grow the pipeline, nurture that pipeline, convert it, and then deliver it with our people and keep them happy. So to be able to achieve all of that under some pressure, that requires something different, I think, that people go to, and that is around human-centered leadership, as in being able to. It's not just about being inspiring people with platitudes. It's more about when things get really hard, being honest, being willing to be vulnerable and saying, do you know what, it's really tough right now. I'm having a tough day, or I'm finding this really hard. Giving people permission to feel that this isn't easy. I feel sometimes that we're all expected to behave like robots, and I think that the power of connection and community and belonging and feeling part of something is what will keep people in an organisation, and that emotional loyalty that it fosters. That usually, for most people, goes well above how much people get paid or their basic paycheck. It gives them meaning, and that human-centred leadership, I think, is the foundation and the centre of enabling all of that to come together.
And I'm just interested, this will sound like a trick question, but it's really not meant to be, but the authenticity that we talked about up front, that some of your Gen Z and maybe broader are clamouring for, is that an input to or an outcome of some of that approach that you're describing, do you think?
I think it's input. I have to make a lot of very difficult decisions across a week. I always think, as long as I make decisions that sit alongside my values, and almost like my moral fibre, right? I treat people in the way that I would want to be treated, and I feel like I've done the best I possibly can by people. As long as I do that and make the right decision for the business, then as tough as those decisions might be, then I feel that I can sleep at night, right? So I think that it's really important for me that people see that's my intention. I won't always get it right, but I think intention is so important and that people understand where that comes from.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in the context of private equity, you talked about sort of rapid growth, rapidly scaling. How do you hold on to all of that's important when you've got to be moving so quickly and the ambitions are so huge? How do you hold on to it?
With difficulty, with great difficulty, if I'm honest. I try not to change, right, as the organisation does change. And I encourage our SLT to make sure, and our board, to make sure that we are all aligned, united, and saying the same message. That said, there are people that have involuntarily become part of an organization that didn't want to become part of, right? Joined a family-based organization because they really recognize something very distinctive about that organization. And therefore, the organization had changed. It changed, it's evolved, it's become something different. And I respect that and I accept that. And if people don't want to be part of it, there's no point in trying to keep people unless they're genuinely, you can see that they could be happy in there. I always use this analogy about chatting with our CEO, kind of who's on the bus analogy, trying to think about if you look at a specific team or a team of teams and you say who's in the driver's seat, who's not bothered, laid back on the back row, who's upstairs maybe trying to have a sneaky cigarette when they shouldn't be, it's against the rules. But then also people who press the button waiting to get off the bus. There might even be people who have already left the bus. There might be people who never even got on the bus in the first place, but trying to understand which people are on that journey, which people want to be part of that journey, is really important because you want to have the people that have signed up to the mission. You want to have people that genuinely believe in it. And I don't believe in trying to drag people along who don't want to be there. It will do the culture no good. It will eventually become a little bit toxic. So it's something that I strongly believe in, that you go with the will of our colleagues.
You're reminding me about a great video we used to use on YouTube in leadership development about who's sinking your boat. I don't know if you've seen it, but it talks a lot about those kind of different contexts, and they don't talk about smoking at the top of the bus, but that kind of same principle of there are always a few people who are trying to sink your boat, and they might not be doing it proactively or consciously, but they're not really rowing as hard as they could be, and so that's some of the challenges. So you just reminded me of that. It's a great video, Chris.
Absolutely. And equally, if we want to keep the boat analogy, we're always talking about what would make the boat go faster. And understanding those metrics that we really want to focus on and push on, and which people are going to enable that too.
Yeah. So actually, I like the bus analogy. So I'm going to stick with the bus analogy. The question I've written down, and you started to answer it, so maybe we just need to talk around the edges before we move on, is can you change who is on the bus? I know there's, to an extent, there will be some people, as you said, they never got on the bus in the first place. We need to probably move away from this, otherwise I will turn it into a tortured analogy. But do you know what I mean? There are certain things that you can do. There's probably some cultural levers that you can pull. There's also communication side. So for some people, it is actually more around being fully made to feel like they understand the direction an organization is going. They understand why an organization is doing this. And often you'll get people who maybe aren't on the bus, but I guess that's the point that you were making. Is this a simple binary question, which is there are some people that just won't ever be on the bus, so to speak?
Yes, that's exactly right. There will always be some people that won't get on the bus. I think that two things. When I talked about cultural alignment and making decisions that are right for the business and me being able to sleep at night, there are some people that if I don't feel that they're right for the business, we need to find a way of moving them on. Equally, another brilliant way to help drive our culture forward is to bring brilliant people in. I have an amazing head of talent, Noelle. She's been in the business she's been in the industry for about 15 years, and she's constantly looking for the right characters as well as those who are technically gifted. We just built a very comprehensive global competency matrix and competency framework, which kind of lists all those behaviors that we look for. And I think that is also very important. The third thing that we do is that we are very proud about how we try to grow our talent from within. And that usually you see the maturity happen very quickly when you move people from non-manager roles into manager roles. All of a sudden they start to see things from a perspective that they hadn't appreciated before, and that also does help. So it's a combination of those three things, I think, of external talent bringing in, moving characteristics out of the business, and then also promoting from within as well. And I'm absolutely clear that the culture is what creates a differentiator for an organisation. I see it. I know, Chris, you're a massive football fan, right?
Yep.
So am I. And I can't let this conversation go without talking about my team, Leeds United. Leeds are not the most talented team in the Premier League by far, but we are most definitely one of the most cohesive, because Daniel Farke, the manager of Leeds, made a very cognizant decision to recruit players with the right characters and the right behaviours. And that is what has enabled Leeds to do extremely well as a newly promoted club and cope with some very talented teams and achieve an amazing set of results.
I'm going to just jump in as well, being an Arsenal fan, and I echo that sentiment with Mikel Arteta, because he, even since he joined the club, he focuses on the kind of the culture, the right type of person. And hey, you can be as a great tactician in the world as possible, but if you aren't leaning into, and this is now a business conversation, if you aren't leaning into that culture piece as well and the right types of people, then you are only going to get so far. We've got probably another 3 or 4 minutes left, and I think we've only got through half the questions that we wanted to. The question I wanted to ask, but I'm going to let you go first, Debbie, because my sort of final question, so I'll let Jonny ruminate on this a little bit, is around what do you think the future is for your role as a CPO, but then also let's go a bit meta and just see how do you think the CPO role is changing, will change in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years? But park that one for now. I'll let Debbie get her question in, because I could see her going, oh, I've got one more.
May I ask you a question? It's because you all went off on a football analogy. I'll just do mine. Crystal Palace supporter here, big exporter of talent, which is perhaps part of the problem. But anyway, then I think you're benefiting from it, Chris Howard. Anyway, my question was, what I'm conscious about in this podcast is we've talked about lots of culture and leadership points, and there were lots of questions we had for you around the commercial aspects of the role. So we're going to park those for part 2. But in my final kind of question around the cultural part is I'm interested in, at the beginning, when I asked what is a CPO, and you talked about the CPO as the conscience of the organisation. And brilliant sort of segue, because we've written a paper specifically about that, how the CPO is the conscience of the organisation, is the critical friend to the CEO and the C-suite, and how that kind of plays out. So I'm just wondering, what does that really mean for you, being the conscience of the organisation? And how do you make sure as that conscience that you are listened to, heard, influential around a C-suite table, not necessarily your current, but around a C-suite table?
It's hard to describe. I think ultimately I have to think about, first of all, protecting the business, setting risk. It can be as simple in terms of people's behaviour or people's impact. What if we've got individuals that could potentially, something unwarranted could happen, trying to anticipate that could happen and how we'd prevent that, or creation of situations that could lead to that, for example. So I don't know, even as simple as having a Christmas party, right? And having a free bar for 3 hours and having no food, right? That's a recipe for disaster. Just don't do things, right? Just get some food in and make sure that people have a great time and nobody's excessively ill. Or in a more serious way is making sure that all our people are trained, they're developed, they get all their mandatory training done, we're not at risk. Anything that's audited, that's all managed through as well. I think also being the conscience of the organisation is about how we show up as a leadership team, how we show up as a board team, what's the perception of us on social media, on platforms, what's the perception of us in the press. Those are all things that I feel that one of my roles is to call out the elephant in the room and saying, what's the thing that's not being discussed? Because sometimes, like when you go into kind of really nuanced technical stuff, I don't need to know that, but I can think in a different space about what's the broader picture here, what's everybody's getting involved in this conversation, what's not being discussed, and that sometimes can lead to some very important questions and conversations as well. Yeah. Those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think there's often a misconception that being the conscience of the organisation means you're the voice of the people. I'm doing inverted quotes with my fingers, which really annoys me. That can be misinterpreted then, I think. And I think it's quite a highly commercial element of the role. So it's interesting how you describe it in that sort of risk avoidance, commercial thinking. It's about what's the reputation, the value, etc. of the company that I think is really key.
I think just one other thing I would say is it absolutely is being able to reflect what the voice of the people are saying. But what's very important is that it's not collusion. It's not about just regurgitating what they're saying. It's about considering what they're saying and balancing that with the commercial of the business. And that is that fine balancing act between enabling our people to deliver the best business growth and people by people. And that is ultimately what we're selling here.
Yeah, 100%. We've got literally a minute or two, so I'm going to hit you with a nice simple one, which is, what do you see the future, the evolution of the CPO role? It's not a catch-all one because every CPO role is created differently depending on industry, company size. Is it heavily federated? Is it heavily regulated? But what's your perspective of how the role will evolve in 2, 5, 10 years?
I think it's interesting where we've come from to be able to answer that. So I think about what was the CPO role called 20 years ago? It was a personnel manager, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was such a different role then. It really was. People would come into your office, have a moan, have a cry, tint issues, and then also it'd be about policies, but it would be very much kind of them telling you what you can't do as opposed to what you can do. The CPO role now is all about building capability. It's about building culture, taking the organization forward and helping them be future fit for the next decade and onwards. I think the CPO, part of being the conscience of the business, more and more organizations I hear are looking at the macroeconomics and the geopolitical situation and becoming acutely aware of that. And are starting to already have war rooms and conversations about how would we operate if another world war were to break out? What would that look like? Or what would all that planning involve? How would we operate? How would we be? So I think that's quite an interesting thing. So I think that the role will just evolve to become more holistic along there. And we've not even touched AI at all, have we? It's obviously here to stay. That is growing by the minute. And it's never going to replace the need for a CPO and a need for leadership, but it's definitely going to continue to be assisting productivity, assisting efficiency, getting to answers quicker. Yeah, I work with Copilot every day, and that's just amazing in terms of how it represents the conversations we've had. And in our business, we're using AI to progress kind of some of the work we're doing so we can deliver it faster for clients. But how that evolves and metamorphosizes is going to become more and more important for organizations as organizations become more and more complex.
Yes, 100%. Jonny, it's been absolutely amazing having you on today. Thank you very much for giving us some of the benefit of your time and wisdom today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we have enjoyed recording it. We will be back pretty soon with another one of these episodes. We've got a number of them lined up with all different types of chief people officers of all different shapes and sizes. Really great chat today. Really enjoyed the chat around human-centered leadership. I think the cultural conversation, the challenges around bringing multiple organizations together is certainly something that I know many businesses grapple with. And if you've got any questions, then what we'll do is we'll pop Jonny's and Debbie's and myself, our LinkedIn stuff in the show notes. So feel free to reach out to any of us. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. And on behalf of myself, Jonny and Debbie, we hope you enjoyed this episode of The People Agenda, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.